Seabird Chapters 13, 14, and 15. Chapter 13, The Changing Years. To Seabird, there was no such thing as time. In her ivory head, today could be yesterday or tomorrow, and she was just as happy. She tilted, dipped, and soared according to the winds that blew. She was forever flying away, yet never left her base. Her coral eyes had looked at many changes since her birth and first voyage on the whaler. Ezra's friend the skipper had taught him well. Ezra finished each ship's school task and was with the same care he had put into carving the Seabird. He rose to be first mate, and at last held a master's paper. Owners of merchant vessels tried him out on their toughest hulks, for they had a later surprise in store for him. They found that Captain Ezra Brown had a way with ships and with those who manned them. He yelled only to lift his voice above the roar of wind, otherwise he talked in low, clear tones, and men obeyed him. Meanwhile, Ezra had married a girl with golden hair and eyes blue as the sea. One day he sailed home to find that he had a son named Nathaniel. The whaling skipper, too old now for sailing, came often to train Ezra's boy. Thus Nate could swim in a pond before he could walk, like any South Sea native, and a few years later, Skipper had him diving from a high pier. "But he's only a child," cried his worried mother, hurrying down to the beach. Across an inlet that stood atop some tall piling, a small tan figure with copper-red hair. See me now," he called over the water, swooping out and down. It seemed ages till he splashed, ages more before his red hair bobbed above waves. As he laughed and swam seaward, Skipper said, "Look at him, part monkey, part fish, part seagull. Your darling Nate may get into a heap of trouble, ma'am, but you'll never have to worry about him around water." Nate grew up wanting to fly like the Seabird. At first he had a sword above his cradle, but always hovered when he awoke. He tried to get at her, but they kept her as hard to reach as a star. Not until he was 10 did Ezra allow him to carry Seabird on his arm as a reward for good behavior. And this was the year that Nate, his father, and Seabird started voyaging together. Chapter 14, Timbers, Sticks, and String. Nate had often played among oak and pine logs piled on the beach. Now he and Skipper and Seabird walked oxen, dragging these well-seasoned logs to a shipyard. Lumber, ropes, and chains and tools littered the wharves. A lazy tide licked the mossy piling, all lumpy with barnacles. Gulls squawked louder than the racket of axes and saws. They circled above, puzzled by the boy and his hovering bird. Nate waved to them, mimicking their cries. The skippers brought the boy's attention back to the logs, now becoming square timbers. Day by day, a huge frame of timbers grew on the beach. It resembled a whale's skeleton stretched on its back, Nate thought. It too had a spine holding everything together, the keel. It too had bare ribs carving upwards. Men pegged timbers against the ribs like slabs of blubber, as the skipper said. Piece by piece, the wooden walls arose, flaring out and around and up in graceful curves. Then one day, a ship's copper sheathed whole side down the ways. To music and cheers, it splashed in foam, rocked like a cradle, and floated on the bay. Nate saw more logs, long and taping, hauled to the wharf where the bare hull was moored. These became 3 masts like jointed trees, tarred shrouds and ratlines so taut that they looked like iron. Ladders braced the masts, while mast yards, spars, and booms were laced together with cat's cradles of hawsers and line. "Look, Seabird, at the blocks in the rigging," said the boy. "Look round beetles caught in spiderwebs. Soon they'll dress her in new sails." One morning, a man and a boy with an ivory bird stood on a ship moving away from the vanishing shore. Sun and sail shadowed swept the rolling decks. Wavelets slapped the racing hull and slid away, whispering. "Listen, Dad," cried the boy. "The waves say, 'Clipper, Clipper, ship, ship.' And Seabird's dancing." "I left the man. She's happy. I once promised her back in the far South Seas a clipper ship to be skippered by both of us. In those days, Nate, you were an undiscovered island, scarcely even a dream. Seabird and I couldn't have guessed that you'd be with us of 10 years old on our clipper's first voyage. Chapter 15. How to stop a full-rigged ship. Nate felt like he practically owned the ship. Hadn't he roped on her timbers when they were nothing but logs? Hadn't he climbed her masts as they grew? Wasn't her captain the father? Crews did not seem aware of Nate's importance. They were too busy with the whims of this untried clipper to notice him. Nate felt slighted until he overheard, "Lad's spitting image you can't measure. He'll make a sailor someday." What did the men mean, someday? He'd show him. He was a sailor already. Luckily, he'd left Seabird behind as he streaked for the shrouds. Gasping for breath, he reached the main masthead and struck a pose. What were they looking at? Did they see him now? Back at the wharf, he had stood at the same masthead, but when the ship was solidly moored on water neatly flat. Now the world was leaping blue-green hills and hollows. Whoa! But he was high. He was a floppy mop on a waving too-long handle. For the first time in his 10 years, Nate Brown felt giddy. A bowsman appeared at his ankles. "Come down, you wharf rat. Want to scare us to death? Give me your hand, or must I carry you? Easy now, child." The word child blew Nate's dizziness all away. He played easy to handle till they reached the mainyard. With the bosun's bellowing after him, he ran the yard as he would a log on the ground. He reached its tapered end. The bosun snarled and crept nearer. As the ship heeled, the man dropped to hug the spar, but Nate dived. 50 feet down, he disappeared in frothy water. He bobbed up, dazed and sputtering, yet not afraid. Nate had always considered the Atlantic Ocean his own pool, to be played in, but rescuing him meant stopping a huge clipper ship under full sail and lowering boats. That took time. It also took many men for the job and made things very unpleasant. Nate found all this out the evening in his father's cabin. Even the Seabird seemed to heel away from him in disgust. Nathaniel Brown was a most unhappy boy. Seabird, chapter 13, 14, 15.